Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now, your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 35. Make sure you like and follow wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander. And we're back to our winning ways with back-to-back winning weeks in the NFL, including Tua and the Dolphins winning and covering easily on Monday night versus the Saints. We'll take that cash as always. But speaking of cash, have you guys already checked out Cash Grab? Well, in case you haven't, Cash Grab is DRF Sports' all-new free-to-play sports prediction game where you can win real money. It's available to every sports fan in the App Store and the Google Play Store. Win real cash prizes every day, as well as a chance to win big money jackpots. All you have to do is download the free DRF Cash Grab app, create an account, and start predicting. Who will win the first quarter? How many touchdowns will Patty Mahomes score? I mean, answering questions like these can end in you making real money. So download the DRF Cash Grab app now and win big. And hopefully we can help you win some real cash here as well, as we do this pod twice a week. On Tuesdays, we recap the week that was, and on Fridays, it's the Picks Pod. Today, we're recapping all of the action from a wild weekend in the NFL, plus it's Christmas Day slate, mix in some NBA Christmas Day games, and of course, it's college bowl season. Still, though, the fun doesn't stop. As the holiday season continues, that just means there's more picks for us to make. And for all of the midweek action in both football and basketball, plus, of course, the college football semifinals are here. We have all the picks. So once again, it's my gift to you as my dude, Matt Russell, stops by yet again to help us all out with all of the picks and more. And luckily for you, that starts right about now. Well, he made it through Christmas, and he's back as we're counting down the final days of 2021. He's my guy, Mr. Matt Russell. How are you doing, my dude? Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, brother. Yeah, the 12 plays of Christmas, we went 6-6 on them, which honestly is about as good as we could have possibly done, given the circumstances. Obviously finished last night with the Dolphins game. I guess we're going to call that a football game. I mean, do we have to? I mean, yikes.
I was gonna say Monday Night Football. Your man's Ian Book. Very tough spot. I mean, we were on the Dolphins in this game. We were there, but it was a lot worse than many expected for the Saints, especially on offense. I mean, what say you about said Monday night game and the Dolphins win and cover at 20-3?
I feel really bad for Ian Book, right? Because the lazy take is like, oh, Ian Book, not very good. And the fact that he went to Notre Dame and we're all sort of familiar with him because I think he played roughly 11 years at Notre Dame. And so we got our fill of Ian Book. And of course, it never really went that great when they would make the college football playoff and all of that sort of thing, right? And so it's like, well, Ian Book's just going to take the beating because we like to, knock around the Notre Dame kid a while, right? And of course, now comes the Notre Dame stat of, it's been 24 games since a Notre Dame quarterback won in the NFL. Like, that's an incredible stat, right? But like, that doesn't really have anything to do with poor Ian Book here. As a rookie quarterback who's essentially fourth on the depth chart to start the year, and a guy who was on the practice squad and probably wasn't supposed to get off the practice squad. And then he comes in and it's like, well, guess what, man? Your two tackles, your left tackle and your right tackle, are out for this game again. And Miami has found this like blitz package or series of blitz packages that is basically like blowtorching all these other way more professional level quarterbacks across the NFL. Now, if you look at that list, it's not that thrilling, but Lamar Jackson's on that list at least. And so you just kind of go like, what chance did Ian Book even have, right? And the backup quarterback is Blake Bortles, who like just hopped off the plane as though he's ready to play an NBA game where he's just meeting guys for the first time on the field or on the bus ride over. And so it's like, well, what's Ian Book supposed to do, man? He probably knows like 7 plays. And it seemed like that was really what, the extent of his knowledge of the playbook. And it's not Ian Book's fault. Ian Book is probably a lot better than Jake Fromm. He's probably a lot better than like Mike Glennon at this point, right? And Mike Glennon's been in the league for like a decade. But unfortunately for Ian Book, he just doesn't have the talent to maybe get another chance here because he really wasn't supposed to have a chance this year. And again, as a, 6th round talent or wherever he ended up going in the draft in the 4th, pick or 4th string quarterback, he's just not going to ever get another chance. And this is what we're going to remember. And again, as you know, right, Monday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, whatever night football is going to, all of a sudden get the old microscope on this poor guy. If this happens at 1:00 on a Sunday, it's just like, well, Saints didn't really score and that's too bad. But instead it's like, we're all subject to it. And I went into this game and I tweeted about it last night. I'm like, I have no juice for this game. And it's in part because it was a missed opportunity if you didn't grab Miami +3, because the line just keeps getting further and further away. And this was a game that I talked about on Friday, having had circled earlier on in the week, right? And that's as these, COVID positives and the line changes and the game cancellations, especially in college football, obviously, like as all these pile up, right? Like it's one bullet after another that you're sort of taking, right? One jab, to the midsection that you're taking. And so I go into that game off of Sunday Night Football last week, and I'm like, okay, I like Miami +3. This is going to be a big bet for me. This is going to be great. And listen, I don't know how that game goes if Taysom Hill ends up starting at the quarterback position, right? But we've watched Taysom Hill. We've watched Taysom Hill under pressure. Like Miami +3 still looks pretty good if Taysom Hill is the quarterback in that spot, right? And the Dolphins didn't look particularly great, which again is yet another sort of element where you go, okay, if the Dolphins are playing the Saints at full strength, like that's probably a 3-point game. And even still, +3 is a ton of value for the Dolphins, but that goes away as soon as we hear about these COVID positives, right? And that means I'm less apt to bet it. And as the line keeps going up, right, it's like, oh no, it's getting worse and worse and worse and less interesting for me to bet on. So I end up making way, way less money than I was intending to, or that I probably should have on that bet. Now, again, different circumstances, and maybe it's a different result, but that's the point, is that like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be getting out of any of these games, any of these teams at this point. And it's hard enough with the NFL having all kinds of craziness on a week-to-week basis with regards to players, coaches, and referees. If you throw in who's going to be important and who's not going to be, and we're going to go through the list of games here that happened over this weekend, and it's just an absolute sweepstakes on just bad football, bad officiating, bad coaching, just bad. And it's like, what's left of this product? And the reality is, honestly, nothing much, because whether it was last night, the night before that, or the entire day Sunday or Saturday, like it's just awful across the board. And it's like, okay, I don't mind awful if we can have something to base a handicap on or some team ratings on. But when we have to throw all of that stuff out the window, we're just throwing darts and kind of guessing on who's going to be really bad, like Ian Book was, unfortunately, again, no fault of his own, like he was yesterday, or who isn't. And like, it's honestly infuriating at this point, because you can't have any sort of legitimate stance on any type of game. Imagine if you're just a guy who likes arguing with people at the bar or on Twitter, the 21st century bar. Like, how do you make any argument about anything that happened, right? How do you make any judgment about anything that happened on Sunday with some of these teams, right? It's like impossible to have a take at this point, because it's all fraudulent. The whole thing is fraudulent.
Yeah, there's so much going on. And as mentioned, I look at it as just got to take the wins as they come and keep moving on to the next game until we get to the playoffs, where we hope we have enough information to continue. And I think looking at Miami, as you said, they weren't that impressive in the win. And with this winning streak that they're on, cool. We'll take the cash and the cover and let's move on, because there's a lot to talk about, as you mentioned, right? Let's start on Saturday, though. And it was a Merry Christmas for me. Things were going pretty well. The Packers failed to cover the 7.5 points as Baker and the Browns kept like Baker and the Browns did good for us. What? I was happy with Baker. You know, they lost because Baker's still a loser. But at the end of the day, that's as
you're
like
giving a lot of credit to your man Baker here.
As he like to say, that's what the money's for, right?
That's right.
Covered
that's
the 7.5 points.
Yeah.
So we have that game on Christmas. We also have Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz and Baker coming through for me on Christmas Day. Just absolutely insane for people who follow this pod. But Carson and the Colts pulling out the outright win as slight underdogs with the 22-16 win over Arizona. Between those two games, which one was the most interesting to you in terms of just rating this team, where they're at now, how they've dealt with, all the uncertainty, and then also just going forward?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the first game was interesting in that the Browns were able to keep it close, but that's not, shouldn't have been necessarily all that surprising, because as they start getting guys back, again, the problem is for every 2 guys they get back, 1 guy goes. And that's, again, the nature of the deal here at this point. But as they get guys back, you go, okay, like this Browns team's getting back to sort of full health here, full strength. And, we talked about on Friday, a full strength Browns team against a full strength Packers team should be about a 5-point spread. 5.5-point spread based on ratings and, again, my number and the sort of market rating and all of that sort of thing. Now, again, you have to kick it up over 7, because if it's 5.5, the world would be on the Packers. Plus, we also had the uncertainty with regards to the Browns, right? And so, we always talk about the Packers, like, how can they be beat? Well, they can be beat on the ground. And so, Baker's just handing turnovers left, right, and center back to the Packers. But like Nick Chubb is just chewing up yards, right? And like we knew that to be the case. And of course he, cracks a long run on a screen play and all of that sort of thing. And so he's all over the field, dominating, as we would expect a high quality running back with a decent offensive line to be able to do that against the Packers. So we make a little note, right? We make a little note for the playoffs, like which team is going to be able to take advantage of that, right? And we'll sort of see down the line if the Packers can just dodge those types of teams, if you will, or not, right? Like if there's a world where the Packers and the Colts, for example, speaking of another team that played on Saturday, if they played in the Super Bowl, right, I can imagine the Packers would probably be the favorite. But do you really want to deal with the Packers having to stop Jonathan Taylor, given what we've seen? So these are the sort of little notes that I'm making. The bigger picture stuff is that Colts and the Cardinals game. And so, listen, we're in the content business, right? Like I write and I have deadlines, and they all, if people understand sort of how even in the internet, which feels like everything should be turned around in 2 seconds, they have to understand how things work with regards to deadlines. Like you and I do this podcast on Friday morning. We are in the era in the season where everything changes from Friday morning until Sunday, let alone even Saturday night. And so for me, I'm sitting there, I'm like, Arizona, this is a 2.5. This team should be 2.5-point favorites. They are +1. That is value. Then by the time Saturday rolls around, where you and the listener gets to bet on this game, you watch that line move. And now you're sitting there going like, I'm getting a full 3 points with the Colts. Like that's outstanding. But what am I supposed to do? Right? Like I have made that bet. I mean, we've talked about this in other examples, right? But it's just another prime example of like, I've made that bet at +1. The line's now -3. And this is the situation that's happened a billion times, it seems like, this season. And everything has gone right? Like Darius Leonard's out of the game. Quentin Nelson's out of the game. Like everybody, the entire Colts offensive line is out of the game. So we've talked about like buying back on the bad news and taking the value of, the line move and all of that sort of thing. And so this is another example where that ended up being the correct play. And there was a world for a while there where the Cards are up by 1 point. And we both would have won. Everybody would have been happy, and it would have been a line value parade down the street with everybody joining in, because Colts +3 would have won and Cards +1 would have won. But it's football, things happen, and we're dealing with Cliff Kingsbury here, who has mashed potato brains at this point. And so this guy just like, he can't think correctly. It's insane. Every decision is like the wrong one. He's done the full on like George from Seinfeld. opposite routine. He's ordering salmon because they swim up the current, or chicken salad. I forget what George was ordering when he wanted to just do everything the opposite. But and for 9 weeks or 7 weeks or whatever it was, like Cliff Kingsbury stumbling into it, like George making that order at Monk's and having the woman, the attractive woman nearby saying, I just ordered the same thing. And now all of a sudden he's got a date because they ordered the same thing for lunch. Like that's Cliff Kingsbury at this point. He's just sitting there on third thinking he hit a triple. Well, now we're starting to see he's trying to do the thing. He's like, well, I think smart people, they kick a field goal here down 10. And it's like, you're on the 10-yard line, man. You're definitely not kicking a field goal there if you're a smart person. You are as close as you're going to get for a touchdown. You have to at least run this play on third down. I'd make the case that you should probably run a play on fourth down when you're that close. You can't kick a field goal to hope for the onside kick and then inhale a Hail Mary. The whole point is to get the 7 points now, get the onside kick, and then have some time to kick a long field goal, because you can do that from a far distance away. I don't need to explain this to you, Shell. I don't need to explain this to the audience, because they know this stuff. But you know who doesn't? The guy who's making $5 to $10 million a year to sit in his Scottsdale pad and not do anything come draft day because they can't let him near the building. Like, imagine a head coach just not being at the draft facility when his team is drafting. The guy's just got his feet up watching it on TV like the rest of us. And this is a guy who, again, if you want to talk about how dumb NFL betting markets are in the midway through the season points, he was right there for coach of the year. Like, come on, people. What are we talking about? Like, this guy is a buffoon of the highest order, right? But he's got nice hair or a jawline or something along those lines. So everything is fine. And so, yeah, like that has to be the bigger takeaway, because the Colts didn't have the players in the uniforms that we give them credit for having when we are backing the Colts. Now, again, it gets to +3, and kudos to anybody and yourself who were able to win a bet on that. But like, we're missing kicks here. We're trying long kicks when we don't even have a holder, as if like a holder is all of a sudden not important. Ace Ventura, the movie, taught us laces out. Like, it's clearly a relevant thing here to have a holder who knows what he's doing. And if you're willing to change holders midway through the game, then you knew that there was a holder issue to begin with. And if you knew there was a holder issue to begin with, you can't be kicking 50+ yard field goals on 4th and 3 when Kyler Murray is on your team. That cannot happen. And so whether it's just pregame and full game decision-making or in-game stuff, and at the end, it is a disaster with Cliff Kingsbury. And the offense isn't even that spectacular. Again, we've talked about it. Kyler Murray's getting, roughing the passer calls left, right, and center, and he's making crazy throws up to DeAndre Hopkins. And it's like, is DeAndre Hopkins the thing? Is he obviously he's one of the top receivers in the league, but is that the difference maker on this team? Like, obviously to a degree, but I didn't think this team was any good when they had DeAndre Hopkins, so I can't think that they're any good now. So as far as ratings and dropping teams, like, the Cardinals have to take a plummet, and that shouldn't be all that surprising when you look at it big picture, because you go down the list. And again, if you want to do this for your own enjoyment or for your own information, right? Start by, at the start of a season, taking the win totals for every team and order those teams by their win total. And you'll get a couple of teams that have outlier win totals where they're 6.5, 7.5, and they end up with 10, 11 wins, something along those lines, right? The Bengals are an example of that. And the Cardinals are an example of that. But you can't be surprised when you're scrolling down and you find the Cardinals as the 20th best team from a preseason standpoint, and all of a sudden things are falling apart at the end of the season. Because at that point, you will then realize through 10 games, you overreacted to just 10 games. And that's what people have done with regards to the Cardinals. And that isn't a surprise to you or I. The surprise is just how embarrassing a high level, big time paid, famous now coach can be in these situations. It is incredible. He got absolutely pantsed by Frank Reich over and over and over in that game. And kudos to the Colts for being able to do that. And I'll bump them up a little bit, right? And because we know they're going to get their players back. We don't know that that's the case for the Cardinals.
Well, the very interesting part here, two things, is a transition here awkwardly, but the two things about those two games, I mentioned Baker and Carson Wentz, and the most interesting part is that as much as I joke around about both of those guys, They really just need to turn around and hand off the ball, right?
Yeah.
For their team to be successful. And that's kind of the most amazing thing that plays into the joke of me railing against both of them. Because you're right, Baker was terrible, but did enough in terms of handing it off.
Yeah, it's why we've bet on those teams. And, it's always uncomfortable. You're like, I have to bet on Baker this weekend. I have to bet on Carson Wentz this weekend. I have to bet on Jimmy Garoppolo this weekend, because it's all the situation where it's like, if they just do the right thing and they turn around and hand the ball off, they're going to cover as an underdog and they might win outright. It's just a matter of actually executing that. Or when they have to throw, those rare instances where they have to throw, just don't make it a disaster. Right. And whether it's Jimmy G, I mean, there's an injury issue now from Thursday night, or whether it's Baker throwing the ball right to the Packers over and over again. And then finally, Carson Wentz just not doing that. Like, that's the difference here. Like, if you have an advantage, take advantage of that advantage.
Jimmy G is going to be the QB of the Browns next season. But anyways, as we go forward, though, you were talking about bad coaching in terms of Cliff Kingsbury, and I can't wait to fade them come playoff time, but to good coaching and the Buffalo Bills and the New England Patriots. We were all over the fact, not only the Bills being able to cover that 2.5 point spread as underdogs, but also to win outright. You were there convincing me to sprinkle a little on the money line, which I always say is an easy, convincing place for me to be. But when I look at this game, right, Buffalo wins 31-21, and the coaching side of it, right, and just what you're getting out of it in terms of, you said, the thing that I go back to is what happened after the last game, where your guy, where you have the Bills head coach in the presser, and he's just kind of like, they're praising Bill Belichick, and you can tell he's just not about that at all. And I found that was very interesting. Like, he wasn't going to bow down to Belichick as people kind of like make it out to be, right?
Yeah.
But overall, as we look at this game and these two teams going forward, is it as simple as we talked about on Friday in terms of, well, the Bills are just a better team?
Yeah. And that's, that's again, it all comes back to, again, I hate to sort of say this, but it all comes back to like the preseason expectations and the idea of, we have the entire summer to evaluate some of these rosters. And, we evaluate a roster and quarterbacks and situations and all of that sort of thing. And we, and obviously people talk about season win totals and those markets, and just people just pounding away on those. Right. And so they're available for 4 or 5 months before the season starts, and, at ridiculous limits. So everybody can come in, and it's like an incredibly efficient market. And then through the course of, again, we're at 15 games, 16 games here this week, or whether it's 4 games, like that, none of this is enough to make these drastic, sort of pronouncements on, this team's better than this team's better than that team, obviously top to bottom. Yes. But like when we're talking about sort of middle level teams here, sort of, I'd say top 10 type teams, like, yeah, they're both kind of pretty similar. And like, we know what the Patriots do, right? The Patriots are going to find an edge when an edge is available. And I've referred to it a couple of different times here, but the Man in the Arena docuseries, Tom Brady stuff, talking about those Patriots teams, and you just relive that over and over again. I think in the last one, he actually mentioned like a weather game, and it was like, yeah, the weather was bad against the Colts, I believe it was the Deflategate game. And right, like imagine suspending a guy 4 games because allegedly there was balls getting deflated. Like, it's the stupidest thing on earth. But, he's talking about that game, and he's like, yeah, we knew that they weren't going to be able to play outdoors, and like, we'd be able to take advantage of this circumstance, right? Because that's what Bill Belichick does. That's what experience is. And so Sean McDermott like took that experience, but he didn't need it necessarily this week because we didn't see the snow. Bill, his weather machine didn't necessarily work this week. And so he didn't
saving it for the playoffs. Saving it for the playoffs.
Saving it, right? You only get 3 or 4 of those per season. He deployed it against Tampa. He deployed it in Buffalo. He'll probably use it again. Don't worry. So yeah, it's like, you're looking at it, you're just going, okay, like this team versus this team in like decent conditions, when you actually get the Bills, who are playing a forward-thinking brand of football, throwing the ball a lot with their mobile quarterback. He's running, he's throwing. It is a bitch to absolutely prepare for, right? And so That's what the Bills are. But when you take some of that away, whether it's Jedi mind trick or, via the weather, and, Allen doesn't have designed runs, or they don't run RPOs, or Allen doesn't even throw all that much like they did in that Monday night game. But the frustrating thing is for bettors, right? Like, we can sit there and know that the Bills are a better team, and we can watch that first game play out and lose that bet, which, again, by the way, probably should have and could have won if they score a touchdown at the end of that game, where balls were hitting guys in the hands in the end zone. And then, the people who back the Patriots win that game, and they get the confirmation bias of, oh yeah, like we, knew, Belichick, and had it the whole way, and ha Bills, like total frauds. And then the good news is, at least we then get a decent line here for the next time they play. Problem is, it wasn't that great of a line. You mentioned like the money lines, like, okay, so we won a plus 110 money line. Like, that's not that great. Like, in theory, that should have been a lot higher. We just watched the Patriots beat the Bills in Buffalo. Like, that number should have been higher, right? In theory, just based on perception, but it isn't, because the market is smart enough nowadays to realize that 2.5 is the absolute highest it's ever going to be. We're never going to get the full 3 points. And that, in fact, this game is actually going to close closer to a pick 'em, which is what it did, right? And so, okay, great. So then we win a bet. Well, we lost the one before, and now we're still down the juice, essentially, unless we were willing to come over the top and bet a little bit more in that second game from just a strictly accounting point of view. And so you're just sitting there left going like, well, we went 1-1 on Patriots-Bills matchups, when like it's pretty clear that the Bills are the better team. But again, on a game-to-game basis, Belichick and company are going to do a certain amount of things and take advantage of stuff. And we don't know on a week-to-week basis what that's necessarily going to be. But there is a ceiling to this Patriots team, and beating all those teams and covering against all those teams that we were like, yeah, have they played anybody? And then they finally beat the Bills. And it's like, okay, they're like Patriots Super Bowl. And listen, I'm still not ruling out the idea of a Patriots Buccaneers Super Bowl, right? Like, this is a team that can go on the road, and if they get the right matchups along the way, can absolutely do that. I'm not ruling anybody out who's a playoff contender, unless you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are somehow still a playoff contender. On a random stray shot at the Pittsburgh Steelers there. So this was the only legitimate game of the entire day, which is the real bummer here, is we'll talk about some of the other stuff that went out. It's like, yeah, this is the only one where you actually had everybody basically on board here, playing on the same field, and there was no other sort of nonsense. There wasn't refereeing chicanery. There wasn't, kickers missing kicks and coaches making buffoonery type moves. This is the only game that you could actually take anything from. And so that's at least something, right? Like, at least we now can at least we can now have faith in the Bills to be able to do something going forward, which we always should have had. But in a short season, right, 10, 11, 12 games, like, people get all mixed up in 3 and 4 game increments, right? And it's like, well, they're not beating this team by enough, or they lost to this team because it was windy. And it's just like, no, let's just see these teams on actual, like, neutral territory, if you will, and be able to see who's better. And I think this was the one game this week where we actually knew what the situation was here while watching this game, which was sadly refreshing given everything else that went on this week.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of everything that happened this week, the one thing I do want to take a look at as we close out the regular season, right? Because there's still a lot of opportunity to win some money. And one of the things we're looking at, we were talking a couple of weeks ago about fading certain teams that might be in 1, 2, 3 Cancun mode. But another thing here, not only because of injuries, but also due to COVID, is the chance to maybe fade some of these bootleg quarterbacks, I'll say, right? I mean, we look at it, we mentioned Ian Book already. There are Drew Lock sightings. Nick Foles all of a sudden came out of nowhere. Nick Foles played well, but it's still Nick Foles. You know what I'm saying? There's a Sam Darnold, Cam Newton combo. Like, there's just a lot of interesting things we're seeing. And by interesting, I'm being facetious there. But is it time to just fade some of these QBs as we go towards the end of this regular season, just like we like to fade some of these coaches?
I mean, that'd be nice, right? But we're running, like, we've been saying this since the middle of the season. We're just running out of people to not fade, right? We have too many teams, entities, coaches to fade at this point. Like, before, we'll talk about it more on Friday or whatever, but like, just some of these matchup this week. And a lot of times it just comes down to the matchups and the card and all of that sort of thing, right? But it's like Giants, Bears. what am I supposed to do with that at this point? Right. Like it's insane. Yeah. It's just absolute insanity. Like Panthers Saints. You mentioned that like this duo that the Panthers are rolling out there, and we thought that might provide something to that team, and they were sort of lingering for a while, but like, again, the more you watch Cam Newton, and it's just like, this is so bad. And so honestly, the NFL product is so bad in general that you can't just say, I'm going to fade this team the whole way. Like, Dan Campbell got hired last summer and people decided that they were going to fade him every game. Now that's a tweet. That's a BS tweet that somebody's just going to write, and they're not going to follow up with that. And nobody's going to follow up with them on that. Right. They're not going to come back and be like, oh, actually Dan Campbell went 8-6 against the spread. Like, how'd that go? And the person will be like, I didn't actually fade Dan Campbell in every game. Like, that was just something that I tweeted out in May, which is why May is just an absolute BS month of the year, by the way, too, as far as NFL takes and all of that sort of thing. And so the point of all of this is like, you can't just say I'm going to fade Ian Book or I'm going to fade Sam Darnold and Cam Newton, because in this case, they play each other. And like the Nick Foles thing was spectacular. Like, we ended up cashing on the money line with the Bears. Couldn't be more surprised. Demir Bird with the best catch I've seen all season, given the circumstances, right? Like, how many times have we seen that ball slip through somebody's hands? I'm looking at you, Russell Gage, that, we're that close to a cover. We're that close to a win. Dawson Knox in the aforementioned Monday nighter against the Patriots, and the ball just goes through a guy's hand. This guy's working in the snow. He's got the ball hanging out on the one side and making sure to get the knee down, fighting off 2 or 3 guys. Like Demir Bird, that's a replacement level player. And that brings me to this whole concept of all of these games. And you can just start throwing them into a pile, because every other game this week had something counterfeit to it. And when we're sitting there on Sunday, just going like, all right, like, we can be the bar guy, right? I want to have some sort of take. Baltimore, Cincinnati. The takeaway should be that Joe Burrow is awesome. He threw for 525 yards. It's going to be in the record book, all of that sort of thing. But I'm sorry, man, like the Ravens had no one in their secondary. No one. And you got the ball back over and over and over again because Josh Johnson's just good enough not to turn the ball over and give you a short field. He's good enough to get maybe a first down and then punt and give you a long field. And of course, the Bengals have, a burr in their saddle from the Ravens blowing them out a couple of times last season and running up the score. And now all of a sudden you've got Joe Burrow against a street secondary just hucking it around. And we're supposed to believe that the Bengals are this awesome juggernaut team, but I'm sorry, I can't. Like, that's great. And we have seen other teams, i.e. the Minnesota Vikings, against teams that didn't have their starting secondary and not be able to get any yards. So I give Burrow credit for that. But when I'm talking about changing my ratings on a team, I'm not going to go nuts with the Bengals. We see this happen. And frankly, we've seen it twice against the Ravens.
Seen it with the Bengals. We've seen it with the Bengals this season.
We've seen it against the Bengals, right? But like, yeah, my point is like, okay, so their 2 best wins are against this Ravens team, who, by the way, like we've been suspect on the entire season as well, right? And that's even when they had Lamar Jackson. So again, like, what am I supposed to do with that game? And the answer is, frankly, nothing. The Rams and the Vikings play, and that game turns on a punt return for a touchdown. And as Adam Amin, who's a fantastic play-by-play guy, this isn't an Adam Amin thing. He's saying it's the second punt return touchdown of the season in the NFL, not by that guy, not by that team, in the entire league. And as he's saying it, they're showing the replay with 2 blatant block in the backs happening at basically a point of potential tackle. And it's like, yeah, of course it's only the second one, because it takes multiple blocks in the back for a punt return touchdown to even happen. But of course, somehow that goes uncalled, because the officiating in this league is absolute, I would say, bootleg, but like, that's too kind. It is absolutely garbage. And so you go, okay, like this poor Vikings team is fighting for their lives. And again, they shouldn't be fighting for their playoff lives. They should have a lot more wins. We know this. Mike Zimmer, all of the stuff that we've talked about in the past. But like, this game should be a 3-point game. And for those of us sitting on +3.5 tickets, watching a punt return go that should be called back, that is called back all the time. A punt can't get returned without a flag. And now all of a sudden we're looking the other way on flag. flags. Like, there's no consistency. There's bad, there's whatever. But like, how about some consistency in your terrible NFL? Like, that would be a treat. And then Washington and Dallas play on Sunday night. And like, listen, I'm on Washington plus 10.5. The line goes down to 9 on Saturday. And you go, okay, like getting line value here. I'm on to something here with Washington. And then Jamin Davis, their starting middle linebacker, rookie guy who doesn't get a ton of credit necessarily, but has played a really good season so far. He comes down with a bunch of symptoms and the test can't come back in time and he can't play. And they end up starting a kid who has never taken a snap on defense as their middle linebacker for that game. And the Cowboys could have put up 70 points. And I'm not saying the Washington football team would have covered if Davis was in the lineup. That might've just been a buzzsaw coming through. But the point is, like, stuff like this happens and you go, okay, I don't know if that's supposed to be a big deal or if it's not. Like, can this kid who's replacing him, like, is he going to be in charge of the signal calling, right? Like, that's going to be an issue. Like, speaking of the Chargers and the Texans, right? The big upset of the week. And you have all these double digits and it's easy to say, okay, let's just take the Eagles. Let's take the Bucks. Let's take all these double digit teams. And you talk about like fading quarterbacks and fading situations. And then you have the Texans and the Chargers, and both teams are missing a bunch of guys on the COVID list. And here's the thing with that game and like why I'm not going to beat up the Chargers for it. And maybe you're saying I'm just making excuses here for my guy, Brandon Staley, but like the reason the Chargers are better than the Texans is they have better players. And I know everybody's going, what a crazy statement that is. Obviously I'm being facetious here. But when those better players, let's call them the A players, the A+ players, the Austin Ecklers, the Mike Williamses, the Corey Linsleys, speaking of center, who is out and a signal caller, right? Now you've got a guy, a replacement center who Justin Herbert hasn't worked with, and he's making the calls for the line protections and all of that sort of thing. And maybe things are just absolutely disjointed because they don't have a 10-year veteran that worked with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay as their center anymore, a guy that they went out of their way to pay money to in the offseason. Now they don't have Mike Williams. Now they don't have Austin Eckler. And so while Justin Jackson and Roundtree, those guys look okay in 2 to 3 carry stints, now all of a sudden those guys have to carry the ball, touch the ball 15 times. And now all of a sudden, Justin Jackson's fumbling the ball. We saw Roundtree fumble the ball at the goal line against Kansas City. That seems problematic, doesn't? Derwin James is on the roster and is dressed for the sole purpose of they don't have any other players. And so they might as well dress him knowing that he's just not going to play and he's going to play in case of emergency. Now you could say there's an emergency when they're down 10 points, but that's not an emergency to the Chargers. They're talking about literally not having enough human beings to play football. Like, that's where we're at. And so when the Chargers miss all these A-level players, guess what happens? Replacement level players come into the game. Well, when the Texans lose all of their players, the thing is, those players that they lost are replacement level players. That's why they're a bad football team. And so when you replace replacement level players with replacement level players, nothing really changes. You're still going to be low key bad. And if you're low key bad, or oftentimes high key bad, and you're playing another team that's used to having good players who does not have good players, all of a sudden things even out. Now, the crazy thing is the market goes from minus 10.5 in that game up to minus 12, even despite the fact that the Chargers are missing all of those players. Like, the whole thing is insane because the market still believed the Chargers were going to beat the Texans and do so handily without like half of their Pro Bowl players, or at least Pro Bowl potential players. And so all of that gets all mixed up and jumbled up. And now you go, okay, well, the Chargers defense that was never good in the first place is without Joey Bosa. So all of a sudden Davis Mills is going to have some time to deal in the back, back there. And he takes that opportunity because I think Davis Mills is actually a pretty decent quarterback. He's just surrounded by a bunch of really, again, replacement level players. And the problem is these replacement level players exist not because that there's some cutoff in the NFL where there's only, say, 600 good players in the world. And if you don't have your, sort of bottom half guys, right? Think about it like from an NBA standpoint. I know we're going to talk some NBA here in a second, right? Every NBA roster is basically built the same way. You have 3 good players, your guys. Like, this is your franchise 3. Sometimes those 3 guys are really, really good. right? Sometimes those are Hall of Fame 3 players, or sometimes those are 3 guys that you're hoping really turn into something with their young squad. And then sometimes they're 3 guys that you're just talking yourself into maybe being good. Now you can think of your own basketball team out there, depending on who that is, whether it's the Sacramento Kings or the Los Angeles Lakers or the Brooklyn Nets or the New York Knicks, right? You're looking and you're seeing those are our 3 cornerstone players. And then the other 2 starters are just kind of there to fill in a role, right? And it's up to them to sort of fill that role as best they can. The 3-and-D guy, the rebounder, the defender, out there guarding the pick and roll, et cetera, et cetera. But those guys you can kind of find growing on trees in a lot of ways, right? It's just, do they fit? And they just happen to be on your team because those are the guys that you selected out of a large group of possible candidates for this role. And then your bench is literally like the thick middle of the league, where there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of guys out there who could be that guy. And it's just a matter of opportunity. And there's guys in the G League who could fill that role. And either, for whatever reason, they haven't gotten the opportunity yet. And there are guys who maybe peaked in high school who have just had that rep for so long that they are one of the bench players. Maybe they're, 6th man, maybe they're the 10th man. Point is any of those guys get replaced, not much really changes because you still have the 3 main guys on your basketball team. Flip it over to football. If you have the 3 guys on maybe either side of the ball, 3 guys defensively, 3 guys offensively, if you still have those guys, you're going to be okay. But if you don't, now you're looking at guys from the CFL who, if you watch a CFL football game, it looks pretty good, right? Like the athletes all look pretty good. The quarterbacks can throw the ball. The DBs are running around. They look fast. They're covering guys. The wide receivers are all 6'4" and can jump and can catch the ball. Like these guys just exist. They are all out there. And so if you just replace a replacement level player with another replacement level player, you're not losing anything. And so as we're watching some of these games, which replacement level players are going to hit and which ones are going to stick on that Sunday, there is no way to figure out which ones are and which ones aren't, because the Giants replacement level players are really bad. The Chargers replacement level players might be really bad. And you know why the Chargers replacement level players are really bad? Because their stars get paid and there isn't that much money left to have even okay replacement level players, right? They have put all of their eggs into the basket of their starting players. When you're the Texans and you're not paying anybody, you can spread that money around and you can have this weirdly deep, mediocre to bad team that doesn't, that you don't have to really worry about losing your best player because you don't even have one. And so whether it's the Giants losing Daniel Jones and everybody going like, well, it's not going to change anything. It's like, well, if your replacement level players stink, then it is going to change some things. So are the Giants the worst team in the league now? Maybe. I can't even keep track of who the worst team in the league is because we're comparing players, we're comparing coaches. We got your guy Dan Campbell. He's kicking a field goal down 7 with 3 minutes to go on the 5-yard line. This is a guy who's going for it in his own territory. It was the one thing we liked about the Lions, is that we liked watching them play because they were willing to go for stuff. And so Dan Campbell is doing dumb stuff. We talked about the Panthers quarterback situation. Nick Foles is winning a football game, which for 55 minutes, you're going like, Nick Foles is terrible. I knew Nick Foles was terrible. Why would I bet on Nick Foles? Well, Nick Foles won a football game on the road in the snow. And it's over and over and over again. Jacksonville doesn't have a play to run on 3rd and goal from the 1-yard line. They don't have a emergency or sort of, red pass play that they can just go to the point where Trevor Lawrence has to spike the ball with 5 seconds left on 3rd down. It doesn't take anything to take the snap and throw a quick fade, throw a quick low slant, something. Anything. And you know why they don't have that play? Because they're poorly coached, because Herb never actually coached that situation, because the new guy hasn't coached the situation, because this whole team is just a dumpster fire from start to finish. And meanwhile, the Jets have 20 guys without COVID, or they're without 20 guys because they have COVID. I think they probably only had 20 guys who were without COVID. And their coach admits after, he's like, yeah, I looked cool on the outside, but under the water, I was, like a duck just paddling away, like frantically. And it's like, both of these guys are just completely unqualified for the position that they're taking. And we're supposed to make bets on these guys. And I don't know whether Dan Campbell's going to go for it on 4th down anymore. And that's bumming me out. And I can't trust the Jags to even run a play on 3rd down when they get the ball to the 1-yard line. Like, this whole thing is out of control, and we can't make any bets on any of this stuff. I mean, Drew Lock played a football game, and people thought it was a good idea to bet on the Broncos. That line moved from Raiders being a favorite to the Broncos being a favorite. Now, luckily, I was in on the Raiders there, but like, I'm watching Derek Carr, and I'm not feeling any better about Derek Carr, really. I just know that I'm betting against Drew Lock, and I'm absolutely here for that. And so, like, which game am I supposed to take anything from Sunday? None of it, right? And then, of course, Monday night rolls around, and I know going in, no matter what happens in this football game, it's not going to matter going forward. And that's really a bummer here, because that's part of sport. We want to be able to take what we watch from these games, have that matter, have that make a difference to how we perceive these teams going forward, especially as a sports bettor. I need that, right? I need those data points. I need that information. Right now, we're just all wasting our time with some of these matchups. And maybe things get cleaned up this week or next week. And I'm glad that the season is running as late as it is with this extra week, not because I want to watch week 18 or even week 17. We just need to buy some time here to get things figured out so that the playoffs that you mentioned aren't the same way, where it isn't a complete disaster every week, where 2 or 3 out of the 4 to 5 or whatever games there are get botched because of this whole situation that we're in. We already know they're going to get botched from the officiating. We already know that your boy Mike McCarthy is going to botch something. We already know Cliff Kingsbury is going to botch something. I just need to have as little amount of botching as possible, and then I'll be okay. But until then, like, I don't even know how you make a bet at this point. And listen, this is a sports betting podcast. We're going to make a few bets here. Don't you worry. But like, it's really hard to make a significant, meaningful wager in these last 3-4 weeks of the season. If it's like this again next year, that's the note. The note is stay away in December or drastically downsize your betting. And again, this is from somebody who went 6-6 this week. Like, it wasn't like it was a disaster. It's just sitting there going like, I don't know what I'm supposed to make of any of these games. And I hate it. Rant over.
You sound a lot like people looking at the NBA these days, and that's just because there's a lot of obviously COVID protocols and stars being in and out and rules being changed and all these things. And one of the things we looked forward to was the Christmas Day schedule for that reason. Yeah. And we tried to give a bit of a preview on Friday's podcast, and hopefully people listened and made their bets when these things were announced, when we had the pod, because the numbers change very quickly. And one of the big things that we talked about was how quickly the protocols can change, and the ability for some of the stars who are listed as out could come out of the protocol late Friday night and be cleared to play on Saturday. So one of those stars was Giannis Antetokounmpo, kind of a big deal. And we discuss, I'll just go quickly through all the games and what happened, and you tell me what's the most interesting thing that you want to dive a little deeper into. But we talked on Friday about the Knicks line being at -4.5. There was no Trae Young. We said it didn't really matter. Knicks blowout. That's what happened. MSG rocking Christmas Day. Cool. We talked about the Boston Celtics at the Bucks. The Bucks were 3.5-point favorites at the time we recorded. Said that number could move, but really like the Bucks. But this is where line value is important. The Bucks end up winning by 4. Giannis plays. We can get into that because, they were down 19, come all the way back. Giannis's over-under number was 24.5. He dropped 36. That might have been the easiest bet I made on Christmas Day. We handed out the Phoenix Suns, who were 4.5-point favorites. We're on the Warriors to cover said spread, plus the money line sprinkle. Yeah. There was some chaos between the Brooklyn Nets and the Los Angeles Lakers in terms of who was in, who was out. The Nets somehow pull out a victory, 122-115, with James Harden, Patty Mills, and us, essentially. And then to close out Christmas, we had the Utah Jazz, who were favored by 10.5 points. No Luka Doncic for the Mavs, but Utah just wins by 4. So overall, just looking at those lines, we were 3-2. Losses in the Brooklyn Nets game in terms of what I was handing out, right? Sure. Brooklyn Nets, I was on the Lakers there, and I was on the Utah Jazz. So, 3-2, looking at the number, but I think there's more important things in terms of how we view these lines and understanding line value.
Yeah, and listen, you're talking 3-2 in sort of the most sort of hardcore way, but you obviously have to factor in the money line element there. With
the money line, and
well.
one thing I got to remember too is yes, the money line factor with the Warriors and with the Bucks down, coming over the top heavy on Christmas Day on a Bucks money line to come back and win. I couldn't stop myself from just dumping more money on the Bucks, and they're down 19. And it's like, this isn't really looking too good here.
Yes. So, between the two of us, and I sort of turned the tables on you asking about these NBA games because I, wanted some action on it. Right. And so again, it's real life betting versus, sort of the podcast and the discussion of that. Yeah. Right. And so if you listen to the podcast, again, depends on what you take away from it. And maybe you take away everything, maybe you take away nothing, maybe probably it's something in between. Right. And so that first game was pretty basic, right? It's like, okay, we like the Knicks here. Is this a Trae Young number? Is this a Knicks, or is this a number without him? You're like, wow, this is pretty much a number without him, but like it could go even higher, right? And of course, it didn't matter and all of that sort of thing. And everybody cashed all the Knicks bets, and there was no issue whatsoever. But we had the CLV elf sort of buck its head against the Bucks in that game. Mm-hmm. And so what we talked about there was bet the number now because we're fine with the Bucks not having Giannis. Now that, again, game goes a certain way and Giannis has a bunch of points and all of that sort of thing. And so maybe the handicap was bad because maybe without Giannis that the Bucks don't win that game and don't cover the 3.5 points. So we would have lost that bet. But because we got to it early, we end up winning that bet, right? And then you go and you admitted that you came over and hit the Bucks again -7.5, even though that line went up, right? But then again, that wasn't on the podcast, so you have no sort of nobody to sort of explain that to. We were on Bucks -3.5. We made that bet. That bet was widely available for an extended period of time. The Warriors won, easy peasy, money line, cash. If you listen to the podcast, I admitted I didn't want anything to do with those last two games. Right? Like we were talking about those last two games being like, okay, like you had to explain to me why Brooklyn was still favored, even though the expectation was that Kevin Durant wasn't going to play. And I needed to sort of understand, because again, I don't follow the NBA this early in the season, that you're like, no, the Lakers are that bad. Right. And so the sort of concept of, well, like the Lakers, it's Christmas Day, like they're going to, figure it out and whatever, like that's fine. But like, if you listen to the podcast, I'm sitting here listening to you talk. I'm like, I'm not betting on that Lakers team. Like I'm not betting on that game at all. Right. And so I can walk away up, 3-0 for that day, having caught the best of the number, which is an element that we talk about all the time, in that Bucks game, going with our, the money line concept of the Warriors and that game being sort of a high scoring, high variance type of a game. Listen, the Suns could have won that game relatively easily. They could have won it like going away. They just didn't because, listen, shots are going up and Steph Curry didn't even have a particularly great night or a great afternoon as far as shooting was concerned, but he, still was able to get it done. And then that last game, right? What was my stance? That game's starting at 10:30. I don't want anything to do with that game. I'm not even going to be close to awake at 10:30. Why am I going to bet that? And like, as we were talking, the line went up from 10.5 to like 12. And it's, it's a lot like the Chargers game, right? That number goes up and it makes me obviously less likely to bet it. And I certainly wasn't going to bet on the Mavericks without Giannis. So it's just, or without Luka, excuse me. So like, why would I bet that game? Like, it's not for entertainment purposes because I'm not going to watch it. There's no value. Nope. We literally were on the podcast while the number went from 10.5 to 12. And so why anybody would necessarily be like, yeah, I'll take the 12. Like, they're just not going to do that. Right. And so, yeah, we're talking about this game and you mentioned like having a lean for that game. And again, maybe you were up late and maybe you were like, screw it, I'm just going to take the Jazz minus the points there. Right. But that's why the context of the podcast matters, because you're having these conversations. You're not just the guy on Twitter just slinging his picks out there with nothing behind it and no sort of regard for the concept of bet sizing and walking away from a play and just abstaining when there's confusion. And so like there's confusion when Luka Doncic doesn't play and the line is 12.5. Like, I don't know what to make of that number. There's confusion when I don't know what to make of this Lakers team and I'm asking you why the Nets should be favored. And of course they should have been, they won that game. or at least, that's my perception of it, for somebody who, again, did not watch any of that game, as I said on Friday that I was not going to watch. Now, I watched the first 3 games and enjoyed those a great deal because, like I said, we won all of those games. So we'll get more into the NBA when it gets down to closer to playoff time. I imagine I will have plenty of time once we get through football season to bone up on my NBA bona fides. And it was just sort of nice, fun to have something else. Obviously, it's fun when you win all of the bets, but it was nice to follow something else and get that little taste of NBA basketball. Obviously, they're going through the same stuff everybody else is going through. And you think of it from whether it's NBA terms or NFL terms, what's the alternative, right? And if the alternative cancel the games and we don't actually get to see any games, like part of me says like, oh, they should just cancel these games because I can't handicap these teams because I don't know any of the players and I don't know any of the, who's going to be good, who's going to be bad. But we've seen what the alternative is with no games, and that stinks, right? Like, I don't want that, right? And so we just have to take what we can get here. It would just be nice that if we could somehow get some sort of consistency with who's playing, how they're playing. I mean, listen, we're never going to get refereeing consistently. We're never going to get coaching consistency, but like one thing at a time here as we go forward.
Yeah, you got to take the positives when they come. And one thing I'll say I have been enjoying a lot are the over-under like points bets and stuff like that, because I just find that to be super fun. And I know a lot of times, sometimes it's just very basic, like Giannis coming back. The number is like 24.5. He averages, I think, like 26 or 27 a game. It's Christmas. He's at home. He's rested. Like it just,
they're not going to limit his minutes.
Yeah, there's just spots where it's just like, wait a second here. I think he had like 17 in the third quarter alone, right? So it's just like, that's what I find fun. But yeah, NBA, we'll be doing that obviously in spurts for the next little while. Take the opportunity when we can, though, on Christmas Day. But there are some midweek picks that we do want to get to. But before we get to that, I just want to give a reminder of the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter, which has been handing out winners all year. To get the winning picks, all you have to do is sign up for free at drf.com/sports. Once you sign up for free, you'll not only get the Sunday Scoop, but you'll receive an additional newsletter every Friday. So sign up now at drf.com/sports to get exclusive analytics, data, and expert picks delivered to your email every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles you don't want to miss. Of course, that's drf.com/sports for all of the insight and analysis you need each and every single day. Plus, of course, we go in depth on this podcast. And I also got a plug as well. Our guy, Scott Gramling, and his 6-pack, which has also been doing work all season as well in the NFL and NCAA. Speaking of said NCAA, I think you hear the music kicking in because bowl season is continuing, which means there's a ton of games on the sched midweek for us to sprinkle on. And so if we were looking to partake in said action, I'm just going to hand the ball off to you so you can tell us where we should be looking.
Yeah, we should be looking at a lot more games, unfortunately. And again, this is part of, and I think that's why, I think this is why you and I are both wearing black today. We followed up our festiveness on Friday with those ridiculous sweaters. Mine far more ridiculous than yours. You actually kind of bummed me out. You didn't step up your ridiculous game. You're a little too clean. We both just went neutral here with just the absolute black sweater, the hoodie situation. Because honestly, like everything else right now, just kind of a bummer in the sports world where you can't look down at your phone without a tweet saying that this bowl game is canceled or that bowl game is canceled. Fortunately here, after we get off the podcast, I hope, knock on wood, we have 5 bowl games today. We talked about Houston and Auburn last week to make sure that everybody knew to get on top of that in case there was a massive line move. There hasn't been a massive line move. I still like Auburn -2 in this game, Louisville -1 in the game after that. And then the 3 games that we didn't talk about for Tuesday, Texas Tech and Mississippi State. This number's up to 10 on Mississippi State, and I get it, right? Like the offense, high flying, air raid, all of that sort of thing. I'm going to stick with the handicap to fade Mike Leach in the air raid offense in bowl games. That's an offense that needs repetitions, and it needs flow. And when you take 3 weeks, 4 weeks off, they haven't played since the Egg Bowl. They haven't played since Thanksgiving.
Jeez.
Thanksgiving. right? Like we literally just had Christmas, right? Like that's a while. That's a while. Yeah, it just, it's hard to wrap your head around, right? But that's, listen, a lot of these teams, especially ones that are in the semifinal, are going to have to deal with a similar situation here, right? So Mississippi State here, minus the 10. I'm taking Texas Tech here. I've already taken them at plus 8.5. Like, I am late on the number. And again, we've seen a bunch of these games get canceled, and it's always the ones that you have the best line value on, right? We have seen the CLV best just go by the wayside over and over and over again. And it's like, you could go ahead and cancel one where I don't necessarily have line value in it, but I'm not asking for a game to get canceled by any stretch of the imagination. We need as many as we can get. UCLA and NC State. This for me has always been a Wolfpack game. NC State -2 against UCLA. Listen, both teams pretty good. UCLA has done well in the Pac-12 when they have been able to push teams around. The offensive line, the running backs, the tight ends in the passing game with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I don't think they're going to be able to do that against this ACC defense that outside of Clemson is probably the best defense in the ACC and at times has even been better than Clemson. I like NC State minus the 2 here. West Virginia and Minnesota is the final game of the night here on Tuesday. I don't love anything about this game. I took West Virginia as this line was moving down from +7 down to +3.5. This is now back up to 5. You're going to get the row the boat whole situation from Minnesota. They're going to be locked in on this game. I actually think they might end up covering in this one. So I have to figure out a way to potentially get out of West Virginia in that game. Either way, don't love either side necessarily. Wednesday's games, we're down to 3. Again, hopefully 3. By the time you listen to this, might be 2. In some cases, maybe it should be. Virginia Tech and Maryland. There's a situation. This is kind of a fun one, Shel. So Virginia Tech, again, if this was a full roster Virginia Tech team against a full roster Maryland team, this line I had at -6 for Virginia Tech. Well, things didn't go great for Virginia Tech this year. They fire the head coach and the quarterback is transferring. And now they are left with a couple other players, leaving town as well. And now they open -2, I believe it was. That's not all that relevant because now Maryland is a 3.5 point favorite. That's how much talent that Virginia Tech has lost in this game. However, I'm not trusting Maryland -3.5 with, Tua's little brother and like this Maryland team that has been up, down, side to side all season long. I'm going to take the 3.5 points with Virginia Tech, and here's why. Their backup quarterback is more of that sort of running style, right? Like, use his legs to get things done type of situation. They still have Blackshear, the running back. Those two guys, I think, are going to be able to work the ground game against Maryland. And I think this game ends up being pretty close with the guys who get an opportunity to play here for Virginia Tech, taking advantage of that opportunity against a Maryland team who, again, needed a win against Rutgers at the final game of the season, even to just get into a bowl. So give me Virginia Tech +3.5. I think that's a bit of an overreaction. Iowa State and Clemson here. We've talked about this game as this sort of interesting concept. As you know, our folks in Iowa are on the edge of their seat about this game and going, with Clemson. And this is another one. If all things were equal, my number would be close to a touchdown for Clemson. And as they lost their defensive coordinator, is going to coach Oklahoma, and the offensive coordinator, he's gone. Everybody's going like, okay, well, Clemson, are they going to care about this game? But I think that element is built into this line. I think this is why this number is -1, -1.5, and has ticked across the picket fence, if you will, of Pick'em. And I'm now, and this sort of takes you 4 weeks to kind of come around on a game here. I actually like Clemson now in this game because it seems like all the players are in, right? Dabo's still around. And if I'm getting a team that should probably be a touchdown favorite at -1.5, meanwhile, Iowa State, they're without Breece Hall, their star running back. Like, they're the team that's actually losing a player on the field in this game when you would think it would be Clemson. So oddly enough, I think Clemson's actually motivated in this game, the Cheez-It Bowl of all things here. So I actually like Clemson in this one. Oregon and Oklahoma, this is the one that I alluded to. If you canceled this one, I wouldn't hate it. I have Oregon +4. It's now Oregon +7 at this point. Again, like both teams losing coaches, both quarterbacks that, do you trust Caleb Williams at this point? Do you trust Anthony Brown at this point? One guy's a vet, one guy's a rookie, essentially. I don't trust either of them. I don't know how how you can expect Oklahoma to necessarily cover 7. They might win this game by 40, but Oregon might win this game by 40. I don't really trust either of these teams, so I would still take the +7, but I would much rather get out of the +4 if I had an opportunity to do so. But I'll watch this game and hope that it actually gets played just for the entertainment value. Thursday, South Carolina, North Carolina. This game, I don't love the point spread. I have already made a bet -5.5 on North Carolina. It's up to 9. So I was able to get that number when it became clear that Sam Howell is actually going to play in this game. And I think it's because, one, the game is in North Carolina. It's in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they're playing South Carolina. So there's like a rivalry element to this game where these two teams didn't necessarily get a chance to play this year where they have in years past. And so Howell stays, which means you're going to get scoring from North Carolina. The problem is North Carolina's defense also stays, which means you're going to get scoring from whoever is playing North Carolina's defense. So I actually am going to go with a rare total in this one because the line is -9 at this point, and that's obviously much worse than -5.5. And you and I both know we shouldn't be giving out the -9s when we're betting the -5.5s. So I actually think that for North Carolina to cover or for South Carolina to cover, I think both teams are going to score here. So at 58, I still think that number is a little bit low because I think North Carolina can get 35, and I think South Carolina can push it towards 30 as well. Maybe a little early, maybe it's late, maybe it's both. I think that this game goes over that 58 total. Purdue and Tennessee, I can't give you anything. We've talked about this, I think, on the podcast before. This number started Purdue as a favorite. That made no sense. Had to bet Tennessee, had to bet them under a field goal, on and on and on. Now they're 5.5 points. If you didn't get Tennessee by now, you have not been paying close enough attention to what we're talking about here on the podcast. Pittsburgh and Michigan State, the other, I think, overreaction game. Kenny Pickett is out for this game. So they go from -3.5 to Michigan State -3. Kenneth Walker, right? We thinking we were going to have a Ken Fest in Atlanta, and now there are no Kens to be found. Kenneth Walker announces that he's out and he's going to go get ready for the draft. And the line goes from -3 to -2.5. Like it moves 1/2 of a point. Now, again, that tells you all you need to know about the difference between the importance of a quarterback, right? Going for a full 6.5 point move through both threes, and then just a star running back, which just drops the number 1/2 point. I like Pittsburgh in this game to still win, and here's why. The backup quarterback for Pitt has been sitting there for 4 years. For 4 years behind Kenny Pickett. Now, if he'd been sitting there for 4 years behind literally just about any other quarterback in the country, you'd be like, well, he's probably not very good. But Kenny Pickett broke basically all the records, all of Dan Marino's records at Pitt. So I'm not going to blame the kid for sitting behind this guy for 4 years. Now, he has an opportunity to win the starting job for next year. Pitt is bringing in Keaton Slovis from USC for next year. They're going to have a little battle. This is his chance to get some good vibes here, some good impressions in an actual legitimate game. It's the Peach Bowl. It's a New Year's Six game here. From everything that I've read from coming out of Pitt, they believe in this guy. They're like, we can run this offense without Pickett. Like we can still do this. He has been around. This guy knows what we want to do. They still have all their players. Nobody else other than Pickett is going to opt out of this game for Pitt because, again, it's the Peach Bowl, right? They literally have the number 1 wide receiver in the country, the guy who won the Biletnikoff Award. He's going to hang in and stay for this game. Meanwhile, what was the last thing we saw from Michigan State? It's them giving up 1 billion points to CJ Stroud in Ohio State. Now, this isn't CJ Stroud necessarily, but this Pitt offense can score. They have, obviously, with Pickett. I think they can here as well. Meanwhile, Pittsburgh, 6th best rushing defense per game yardage, and there's no Kenneth Walker. So you're looking at the Michigan State, backups having to deal with a really good run defense, whereas the Pitt backup quarterback has to deal with a really bad defense. Like that seems like it's going to suit Pittsburgh a lot more than it's going to suit Michigan State. So we're getting plus money on the money line here with Pitt. I think they win this game without Pickett. I think it's an overreaction and we get to take advantage of that. Speaking of reactions, Arizona State and Wisconsin, this line stood at 7 for like 3 weeks and has now kind of come off. And I hope that's not because there's some sort of BS COVID news about Wisconsin or whatever, because I like Wisconsin to just run it down Arizona State's throat. I like Wisconsin to shut them down on the defensive side of the football. So yeah. I like Wisconsin. I bet this at -6.5. It's down to -6, so you're actually getting a better number potentially than I have. Hopefully it's not because there's some sort of bad news coming out of the program there. Friday, here we go. The game you've all been waiting for. Rutgers and Wake Forest. No, that's not the game you've been waiting for. That's a game that just kind of got made up last week. Sure, I don't have a play for that game. It's 15-point spread for Wake Forest. I don't know how much Rutgers was doing in the 2 weeks where they didn't have a game to be played, right? Like what kind of preparation were they going through there? Even if they were preparing, it's still Rutgers. How good could that have possibly have been? What we are talking about here, though, is the college football semis. Now, we're going to talk about this on Friday, but the first game's at 3:30. Now, listen, we've talked enough about this game. Maybe not necessarily enough, but we have talked at length about these games. Cincinnati and Alabama, I grabbed it at 14, right? And that is sort of where I stand with Cincinnati plus 14. Numbers at 13.5 might even tick down a little bit more. You know how I feel about the defense on Cincinnati. I think they can hang in. I think the dual threat element of Desmond Ridder can keep Cincinnati on scoring here a little bit. And I think this game's going to be a little bit low scoring. I know that Colin Wilson was on the show, and I think he talked about that potentially with you as well, about this game being a little bit more low scoring. The real question mark is the nightcap, Michigan and Georgia. And we have sort of heard, rumors about COVID positives, JT Daniels testing positive, and JT Daniels is sort of nominally the backup quarterback right now, but maybe not, right? Like that's a guy who might see some time in this game if all things are on the up and up. And that's a guy who we might see if there's a rematch against Alabama, because it didn't work all that well for Stetson Bennett. And so again, I'm still waiting. And the problem is here, I'm waiting for Georgia -7 that I think we might get on game day. The problem is, why are we going to get that? Are we going to get it because people are betting Michigan, which is fine. That's why that would lead me to a bet on Georgia. But are we going to get that because a bunch of COVID positives and all of that tracing type stuff hit Georgia hard and they have to sit some guys? So we're going to keep an eye on that. We'll be back on Friday morning, and of course afternoon the podcast comes out. We'll be able to talk about this further. Maybe there'll even be some prop bets, some prop markets, though at this point you can barely get an NFL prop market the day before a game, so who knows. But we will talk about this a little bit more on Friday, but wanted to just get that out to you on Tuesday.
I like it. I like it a lot, as per usual. So much information and education and so much action for us to deep dive into as the holiday season continues. But if people want more information from you, my dude, where can they go to get said information?
Yeah, celebrate and commiserate, man. Over at @MRussAuthentic, right? We trying to limit the negativity on some of this stuff. Obviously, we had a few rants here today about this stuff, but like, you guys are watching it. Like, you guys are, the folks out there listening to this, like, you guys are watching this and just sort of shrugging your shoulders and throwing your hands up on some of these games. And maybe you're just kind of coming in on every favorite and parlaying stuff together. And maybe you're keeping the Chargers out of a heavily favored parlay. Sheldon's shaking his head right now as a guy who may have been victimized.
My feelings are hurt. Okay. My feelings are hurt.
Sorry, man. Yeah. And so listen, hopefully we get some college basketball back. Like, I'm very worried about that. Last Tuesday, we talked about the 2 prime games of the week. I gave out my numbers. Both of those lines were too short, and we were able to hit on the favorite in those 2 games. So that was kind of nice, as sort of the, hopefully not long farewell to college basketball, as we see basically half the games and a little bit more than half of the games getting sort of canceled here. Again, like anything else, right? We're going to take it as they come, whether it's on the field or off. Over at MRussAuthentic on Twitter, everything that I write over at The Score gets retweeted through there. So you should be on everything that I'm on, or sort of, have more than enough information as far as my takes on these games are concerned, such as that is.
Sounds good, my dude. Appreciate you coming on as per usual.
Thanks, brother.
And if you want to follow me online, you could do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Like and subscribe to the DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And for more from this brand new project from DRF Sports, we just got to make sure, if you're not familiar with the letters DRF, daily racing form has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we're taking over the entire sports world. So if you want all the coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, go to drf.com/sports. That's where you get the usual game previews. And of course, we go in depth on this podcast. Basically, however you want your betting information, we've got you covered. That's all I got for now. But remember to tune into this DRF Sports podcast every Tuesday and Friday. And hey, sometimes if you're lucky, we sprinkle in a little extra episode here and there. But until next time, that's all I got for now. See ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at @DRF_sports.